Minis Forum have released two small form factor PCs. They are gaming focused. We have the Nook X i5 model and the Nook X i7 model. So this model has the Core i5 11th gen 11400H, 6 cores. And then we have the Core i7, it's the 11800H with 8 cores. Now this model here has an RTX 3070 and this one the RTX 3060. So there's a bit of a difference there. Now I will be comparing the difference in the performance from these two models here since they both have the same config. So Wi-Fi 6E, 2.5 gigabit LAN and 16 gigabytes are the configurations that were sent out to me of RAM. And then we do have 512 gigabyte PCI 3 SSDs. Included with both versions, you will find a 230 watt power supply. It's a reasonable size, and this is basically like a gaming laptop power supply. It is also from a known brand. I've seen them before, FSP. So the plug right here, this is an EU plug, depending on which version you get. You'll get a US or an Australian, New Zealand one too with it. Then we have our stand, which is a sturdy metal stand. Well, there's some plastic around it, but a metal base here at the bottom, and large rubber pads all around the outside, so it's not going to be slipping off any tables. They do include this, which is a user guide. Now, if you do check it out, take a look. It will tell you how to gain access to the internals, how to pull off one side of it, so then you can replace the SSD or upgrade the RAM if you wanted to do so. Then we have this, which is our HDMI cable, and then 2 screws for that stand to secure it in place. And here we have our thin but flat mini PC. So small form factor. It's not really mini compared to mini PCs that would be about this size. So both of the versions have the same power supply. They both look exactly the same. The only difference is the internals. So the Core i5, the 11400H, has the NVIDIA 3060. Then we have the Core i7 model, which is the 11800H with the 3070 more powerful GPU. So this is alloy here on the top, and we've got this, which looks exactly to me like the skull logo that I have with my Intel Nook Extreme Mini PC. On the other side of it, you'll find we've got a huge vent here, so it's going to let a lot of fresh air in. Accessing the internals is not difficult, so 3 screws on the bottom, undo those, you lift it up, and then you need to push it that way because it clips into the top here. Once that comes out, you can then lift it up. So again, we are looking at basically the internals of a 15.6-inch laptop. And wow, you can even see here, we've got the connector for the battery, and this looks like we'd plug in the ribbon cable for a keyboard, backlit keyboard. So there's a lot of little connectors here that aren't used, obviously. So we have PCIe slots right here, which is good. We've got our BIOS battery, so if you need to reset the settings, you can simply unplug that. And the cooling looks quite good. So 5 copper thermal transfer pipes here. And we've got a lot more cooling right here too as well, which is good to see. And RAM upgrade, so 2 SODIMM sticks, both of these a data sticks. They're 3200 megahertz, so you could upgrade those. I've got 16 gigabytes right here, but you could put up to 64, so 2 32 gigabit ones, of course, but just make sure you get the same speed. Wireless card can be upgraded, and that's really it. We can add another SSD. There's a lot of free space here, but it looks like it's just not going to be enough to put in a 2.5-inch drive, sadly. Would have been good if we could have at least put one 2.5-inch drive to give ourselves some cheaper, large capacity storage. You'll find located here at the top of it, also down the bottom where we do have those feet there for the stand. That's where you're going to be screwing it on, but it leaves a bit of a gap so some air can get out here. So again, this is why it kind of looks like the internals of a notebook, a 15.6-inch one, are basically in this here, minus the keyboard and screen. The back of it, we've got 2 exit vents here. Again, this is very similar to, say, a gaming laptop. So it sucks in the fresh air from that big vent, and then it's blowing it out of those 4 vents there. So we have Thunderbolt 4, HDMI 2, 2.5 gigabit LAN. Really good to see this, and not just gigabit LAN. And of course, power in there. 3 USB 3.2 Type A's, 3.5mm with mic support headphone jack, SD card reader. Then we have this, which are our different modes for the fan. So we've got a gaming mode. This is to maximize performance, but the fans will be louder and noisier. And then just the PC mode. And here is our power button with status LED. So you can see that it is quite thin, but it's about the same size of a 15.6-inch laptop. So one thing Minis Forum does well, in my eyes, is definitely this. They keep the BIOS unlocked to us, all of the settings for enthusiasts, but it's great. For those that want to tweak, you can actually do it. I hate it when I'm locked out of this. So we've got lots of different options here. So in storage, you can see all of those right there. You can even set up RAID if you wanted to. You've got onboard devices. You can disable some of them if you didn't want the onboard Bluetooth or audio, whatever. You can do that. Undervolting, so they do benefit a lot, these particular chipsets here, if you undervolt them a little bit. But do it first in Intel XTU, find somewhere that's stable, then set it here at BIOS level, is what I do anyway myself. Under performance, we can adjust a few settings here with the CPU memory. Now, this is an important one. So the memory timings with their included A-data RAM is terrible. So CL22, wow, that's very high. And under profile here, we don't have an XMP profile. Now, if you install your own RAM that does, that's where you want to go along and set it. And I've even got RAM that I can tweak the settings right down to CL16, really speed things up, and that is really great. So here you'll see under power, we've got a few options. This one's very important. So after power failure, if you want to run this as a server, then this is the one you want. You probably want it on last state or just power on, okay? And you can set it up on a switch too if you even want to go that far, which is really good. And then our typical boot menu here. So let's jump over into Windows. By the way, both of the models, the Core i5 model and then this Core i7, no, in fact, this is actually the Core i5, they have the exact same settings when it comes to the BIOS. Now, both of these NUC X versions, the Core i7 or the Core i5, come with the same brand of RAM. It's always running in dual channel, 3200 megahertz, and it has a CL22 timing, which is not brilliant. You can install faster RAM. I showed you that before in the BIOS. So they all have this, which is the Wi-Fi 6E card, the AX210. This is from Intel. It has Bluetooth 5 support. It's very quick. It's one of my favorite wireless cards. And you'll see that the link speeds that I'm able to achieve are pretty much normally what I get with any Wi-Fi 6 card with my Wi-Fi 6 router. My router doesn't support Wi-Fi 6E, unfortunately, but I will be changing it soon. So I get about 1200, as you can see. That's receive and transmit. Sometimes with some other cards, I sometimes see about 1300 is my typical kind of speed. So that is good. If it's around that figure, it's over a gigabit, then I'm quite happy. Of course, if I change my router, it will probably be a lot quicker than this with Wi-Fi 6E. Now, the two versions, one is, of course, the RTX 3060, which I'm currently looking at. So this has a power limit, the GPU of 130 watts. The RTX 3070 is 145 watts. And I'll get onto the thermals and everything like that later on too. So you can see here the CPU listed, of course, 12 times here because it has 12 threads, 6 cores. Maximum turbo is 4.6. Now, if you intend to just game, you don't really need the CPU power. I would go for this version, the Core i5, but of course there's a big difference with the GPU. The RTX 3070, more future-proof, has more dedicated RAM at 8 gigabytes. It's better at 1440p. It's also better at 4K gaming. So it really depends on what you want and your budget, of course. Now the Core i7 model, it has the 11800H 4.6 gigahertz maximum turbo. You don't really notice too much of a difference. However, it has 16 threads and 8 cores. So if you're going to be doing a lot of, say, 3D rendering, you need that kind of performance. Obviously, it's the one to go for there. Now, the playback of files here are exactly the same, demanding 4K files. They all look pretty good here. You see when this opens up. And it may do an initial stutter. Blanked out for a second, then my capture card. Sorry about that. And that is good. That is 60 frames per second. Very smooth. So that, of course, is the CUDA cores handling this, the NVIDIA GPU. What I've also noticed, if you go into the GPU settings under the control panel, they've disabled for some reason the Intel Iris Xe graphics, because normally it would be right here and you'd be able to go and just force to have either one if you wanted to, and it does better fit video encoding. So I don't know why they have disabled that. You'll see clearly in the the device manager here that it's not listed under display adapters. It's just clearly the 3060 laptop GPU or the 3070. So I don't know about the BIOS. It should be there. Hopefully I can enable the integrated GPU as well, because I actually want both of them. But this way, having it dedicated, it is going to be a little bit faster too. And it is, of course, connected up directly to the HDMI port. Now, the SSDs are the same. 512 gigabyte version I do have here is a Phison one, and these speeds are not as fast as Samsung's 970 EVO, for example. They would be a little bit quicker here, but for PCIe 3.0, it's not bad, a lot faster than SATA. Now, the other slot there is a PCIe 3.0, and I believe that the main slot could actually be PCIe 4.0 spec. Certainly the 11th gen does support it. I will need to test that out, but I'm currently recording on my only PCIe 4.0 SSD, so I can't test it right now. Now on to a few synthetic benchmarks. Now I won't spend a lot of time on this because I know it is boring, but here you can see there is a bit of a difference between the multi-core scores here between the Core i5 model, which is on the right, and the Core i7 on the left. Now, if you intend to do a lot of heavy multitasking or you need that CPU power, then go, of course, for the Core i7 model. It is quite a bit faster with multi-core score, but single core is basically identical. And if you game, then it really makes no difference because most games are single core there. That's what they really benefit from, the performance of the single core scores. So here we have Time Spy here with 3D Mark. So this is the stock scores on both of them. Now I haven't tweaked or overclocked or done anything, and you can see that yes, there is a noticeable difference, but it's not a huge gap. But more think about the future proofing of the RTX 3070 model, and especially if you tend to play, say, 1080, more than 1080p resolution, so 1440p or 4K, you probably want the 8 gigabytes of RAM, definitely, versus the 6 that you get with the RTX 3060. Now what I did is spend a couple of hours then on both of these units trying to find a good overclock on both of them. So you can see that the RTX 3070 does overclock reasonably well, okay? You get around about 10% or so more. It did take a long time, so you can get around 600 megahertz. This will vary from unit to unit on the memory of the GPU, and then about 110, 120 on the core, but each unit will vary, of course. Then the overclock that I managed to get here, which was stable out of the RTX 3060, did then boost up the score, you can see, to be a little bit higher. So it's not really that worth it. It's not really worth it at all, to be honest, on the RTX 3060 to do any overclocking. Now, interestingly enough, I've noticed here that it won't pull anywhere near the 145 watt power limit that we do have with the RTX 3070. Now, it will get up to around about 125, and then the 130 watt power limit we have with the RTX 3060, it also does not get up to that. It also just maxes out about 100 watts, so it's a hell of a lot less. I don't know why this is happening, and thermals, as you see now on both of them, are very good, so there's plenty of headroom for these GPUs to be pushed a little harder. And finally, the last of the synthetic benchmarks, this is Cinebench R23. You can clearly see a huge gain there in performance thanks to the 2 extra cores, 4 extra threads of the Core i7 model when it comes to the multi-core score. But again, the single core scores, they're really about the same. Now, the difference in gaming performance between the RTX 3060 and the 3070 is not as much as you think. When I tested out The Witcher 3, we're looking around 5 to 10 frames per second more on average with the RTX 3070. So does it warrant going for it? I think it does. If you're going to be running 1440p resolutions or 4K, you definitely want the RTX 3070, which also has an additional 2 gigabytes of VRAM. That's going to help out. It is definitely the faster card, but if you're running 1080p resolutions, there's not too much of a difference. Thermals and fan noise on both of the systems is quite good. So the fan noise is not even really that of what I would call a standard gaming laptop. It's a little bit quieter. We see around about 80 degrees on the CPU side of things on both of the models, and the GPU normally creeps up to around about the mid 70s, lower 70s. So the temperatures and the fan noise, I think, are good. You can see here the hotspot, that's what gets up to 73 degrees. Now, video editing is very good on these mini PCs, both the RTX 3060 Core i5 version and then this 3070 Core i7 version. The timeline is excellent. There really are no drop frames because of those CUDA cores. We have the dedicated graphics memory too. It's all helping this performance, and this is why I often say in those mini PCs that I do review with integrated graphics, you need to have this. You need to have a dedicated GPU in order to get the really good performance, especially with long video edits. Now, not having a dedicated GPU, integrated graphics, is fine for very small edits, but not this kind of stuff. It definitely is a lot faster and just makes things much more pleasurable when you are editing. Let's take a look at the export times, but I don't expect it to be super quick because we don't have the integrated graphics, which does help the encoding speed here when you're using Adobe Premiere Pro, for example. I have 1 minute of footage here, and I'm going to be encoding in the 4K YouTube preset, which I always test out. Now, it should be well under a minute here, especially, of course, with the NVIDIA RTX 3070. So I'll hit start on the timer and export. So there's a bit of a delay there. And it is about to finish up. So as soon as that disappears the screen, once the progress bar goes, so there we go. So approximately you can say with my delays about 34 seconds. It's very quick, but it could actually be probably around 24 seconds if we did have the Iris Xe graphics, integrated graphics, also helping out. It splits the load between both the dedicated and integrated GPU using QuickSync. So that's a shame that I can't seem to enable that. But I know it's a gaming laptop, so most gamers probably won't even want anything to do with that integrated GPU. It's just good for this kind of use. And finally, a very quick test here of a Linux Manjaro. This is from a USB pen drive, a live image, and everything is working drivers-wise, and it absolutely flies here, of course. This kind of spec running a Linux, which is really lightweight compared to Windows, is so fast. Okay, so it was obvious that the more expensive model is going to be the more powerful model, but I wanted to see how much of a difference, just so people know that if you intend to game, say at 1080p only, you're on a budget, the 6-core model with the RTX 3060 will be fine. But if you want more future-proofing, and if you, for example, want to play in 1440p with your monitor, or higher refresh rates, say you're going to run 144 Hertz your monitor, or you want to be gaming at 4K 60, then you definitely want to go for the more powerful RTX 3070 model. It's obvious, but the difference in the CPUs there is not that huge, unless of course you intended to do very CPU heavy workloads. And again, you want the extra 2 cores, the extra 4 threads, go for the Core i7 model. I think for the difference, there's not that much in it price-wise. I would probably go for the RTX 3070 myself to be a little bit more future-proof. And the RTX 3070 performance is not actually that far off when you give it a little bit of an overclock from the desktop counterpart. It's actually pretty good there. And you do get, of course, an extra 2 gigabytes of dedicated RAM for the GPU. So clearly, when you look at it, when you see the internal, it's like, okay, that's just a repurposed laptop. And then that's fine what they've done. This is something that I've thought about for years. And in fact, I did it about 10 years ago. I had a broken screen in the laptop. I just plugged it into an external monitor, and I used its keyboard and plugged in a mouse, and away I went. So it's basically what this is, because when you look at the motherboard, oh, look, there's the plug for the battery. There are the other points you can see on there, the headers and whatnot for the keyboard. You can see where the plug is there for the display. So it's pretty obvious, yes, it is laptop internals in a new chassis here to be used as then a small form factor PC, which is fine. And yes, guy in the comments, well, why don't you just buy a gaming laptop? Of course, people have that option, all right? And a lot of people will probably do that. But I know some people, like what I used to do, I used to plug in my laptop as well with a working screen, this one, into an external monitor and an external keyboard and just use it like that. And I even actually stood it up next to my monitor, which kind of looked just like this. The stand was very, very similar there. And that's an option, for, of course, for people that don't really want to have a screen. They want a fixed, permanent desktop, basically. And that's what you're getting with this particular model right here. So the thermals are excellent. You can add another SSD. We've got Wi-Fi 6E, that is really good. 2.5 gigabit LAN, that's another big bonus there. it is really a very good mini PC. There's just really, for me, one area, and that is, well, two. One of them is, why is there no option to still enable the integrated graphics? I know I can do that with my Intel NUC Extreme I've got, and it really benefits when you're encoding video and exporting video to have the integrated GPU also using Intel's QuickSync, and that really speeds things up. That's the only reason I can see that most people would probably want it. I know for gamers, you want to be and only have the dedicated GPU, but a mux switch setup would be good in the BIOS, so we could go in and just simply swap it over like we could with, say, MSI laptops. You can do that with their gaming laptops. The other is something interesting is going on with the power limits with these GPUs. So I can see the RTX 3070 in the system info from NVIDIA's control panel. You can see that, okay, it should be able to pull up to 145 watts, but in reality, it's only pulling about 125 watts. The RTX 3060 is only pulling about 100 watts maximum, when it could be able to pull, according again to the control panel info, about 130 watts. So something's going on there. I think it's probably to do with the core clocks and the voltage that is set with the BIOS. I hope that they could tweak that, Minis Forum, because there's a lot of thermal headroom still to push the GPU harder. They could set a slightly higher thermal throttling limit too on the CPU on the Core i7 model, so you could get more performance out of it. Now, what I did not do is I did not go into the BIOS and undervolt and increase power limits to, say, with Intel's Extreme Tuning utility. So there is room to push these a little harder, considering the thermals are so good. So overall, they are fantastic, gaming-orientated, small form factor PCs here. Not mini PCs really, because look how tall they are. They are very tall, but nice and thin. So thank you so much for watching my review and comparison of both of the NUC X models here from Minis Forum.